In the final years of the Second World War, the world trembled on the edge of destruction. Cities lay in ruins, nations were shattered, and millions had already perished. Yet behind the thunder of artillery and the roar of bombers, another battle was being fought, hidden from public view. It was a silent war of science, waged in laboratories and secret facilities, a race to unlock the most powerful force ever discovered by humankind, the energy of the atom. While Allied scientists toiled within the guarded compounds of the Manhattan Project, intelligence reports began to surface from occupied Europe. They spoke of another effort, one led by Nazi Germany. Deep inside Hitler's Reich, physicists and engineers were pursuing their own atomic dream. If the Führer could harness the atom before the Allies, he would possess a weapon capable of obliterating entire cities with a single blow. The outcome of the war, and perhaps the fate of civilization itself, hung in the balance. The story of this race began years earlier, in 1938, when two German scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Stresemann, made a discovery that would change history. By splitting the nucleus of uranium, they found that a vast amount of energy could be released. This process, known as nuclear fission, was soon recognized as the foundation of an entirely new kind of weapon. When news of the discovery reached the scientific world, one man quickly grasped its terrifying potential: Werner Heisenberg, one of Germany's most brilliant physicists and a Nobel Prize winner. Under the command of the Nazi government, Heisenberg and a select group of scientists formed what became known as the Uranium Club. Their mission was simple in theory but monumental in practice: to create a bomb powered by atomic fission. Hitler's vision of a 1,000-year Reich demanded absolute dominance, and he believed that mastery of atomic power could deliver it. Yet even as his scientists advanced their theories, they faced a problem they could not easily solve. To build a functioning reactor, they required a rare substance known as heavy water. Unlike ordinary water, its hydrogen atoms contained an extra neutron, allowing it to slow down the movement of atomic particles and sustain a nuclear chain reaction. Without heavy water, the Nazi atomic program would stall before it could even begin. And there was only one place on Earth capable of producing it in the quantities they needed: the Norsk Hydro plant in Vemork, Norway. High in the frozen mountains of southern Norway, the plant had been built to produce fertilizer, but its unique hydroelectric capacity also allowed for the manufacture of heavy water. When Germany invaded Norway in 1940, the facility was quickly seized. The occupiers might not have known at first what treasure they possessed, but Berlin soon realized its value. Under Nazi supervision, production increased, and heavy water shipments began to flow toward the Reich. To Allied intelligence, the reports were alarming. If Hitler gained access to enough heavy water, his scientists might achieve the chain reaction that would open the door to atomic weapons. The Allies had to act, but the problem was immense. The Vemork plant was surrounded by cliffs, icy rivers, and layers of German defenses. Air raids would be nearly impossible. Any attempt by land would require crossing vast, hostile terrain under brutal winter conditions. And yet, failure was not an option. In London, military planners and intelligence officers gathered in dimly lit rooms to discuss the unthinkable. Could a small team of saboteurs infiltrate Norway, reach Vemork, and destroy the plant from within? It would require courage beyond imagination, endurance against the Arctic wilderness, and a willingness to face certain death if captured. The mission, if successful, could change the course of the war. If it failed, Hitler's atomic dream might become a reality. From this desperate need, a plan began to form, one that would call upon the bravery of the Norwegian resistance and the determination of Allied commandos. Together, they would attempt what no army could achieve: to strike a crippling blow against Nazi Germany's secret weapon before it could be unleashed upon the world. This is the story of that mission. A story of science, sacrifice, and the struggle for survival in a world on the brink of annihilation. It is the story of the men who risked everything to ensure that Hitler's atomic dream would never come true. Before Hiroshima, before the age of nuclear fire, there was Vemork. And in the silent snow of Norway's mountains, the fate of the atomic future was decided. In the early years of the Second World War, while German tanks rolled across Europe, another kind of battle began. One waged not with weapons, but with equations, reactors, and theories. Inside laboratories and research institutes, Some of Germany's brightest minds worked under the command of the Reich, driven by a single question: could the energy of the atom be turned into the ultimate weapon of war? At the heart of this pursuit stood Werner Heisenberg, a name already legendary in the scientific world. Winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, Heisenberg had helped define quantum mechanics and the uncertainty principle. Now, under orders from the Nazi government, he was tasked with unlocking the secrets of nuclear fission for Germany. Heisenberg was not alone. Among his colleagues were Otto Hahn, who had discovered fission, and Kurt Diebner, a physicist known for his efficiency and loyalty to the regime. Together, these men formed the core of the Uranium Club, Germany's secret atomic research group. The scientists believed that if they could split uranium atoms in a controlled way, they could unleash a massive and continuous release of energy. To do this, they would need to create a nuclear chain reaction, a process in which each split atom causes others to split in turn. This reaction could power a reactor or, if released explosively, a bomb capable of unimaginable destruction. In theory, the path seemed clear. In practice, it was anything but. The challenge lay in finding the right materials and conditions to sustain the chain reaction. The Uranium Club faced two critical tasks: acquiring enough pure uranium and developing a substance to slow down or moderate the neutrons released during fission. Without such a moderator, the reaction would fizzle out before it could gain strength. German scientists experimented with two possible materials for this purpose: graphite and heavy water. When they tested graphite, impurities caused the reaction to fail. Unaware that pure graphite could have worked, Heisenberg's team abandoned it and turned instead to heavy water, a rare and costly material that existed in significant quantities only in one place on Earth: the Norsk Hydro plant in Vemork, Norway. The Nazis' interest in heavy water grew rapidly. The substance was produced as a byproduct of fertilizer manufacturing, but under German control, its purpose shifted from agriculture to warfare. The Wehrmacht classified it as a material of national importance. Within months, barrels of heavy water began to move out of Norway and into Germany, destined for the laboratories where the Uranium Club was experimenting with prototype reactors. Meanwhile, within the scientific community, doubts and tensions began to surface. Some German physicists questioned whether an atomic bomb was even possible within the timescale of the war. Others feared what it would mean if they succeeded. Heisenberg himself seemed torn between loyalty to his nation and the moral implications of his work. In private conversations after the war, he would later claim that he had deliberately slowed the progress of the Nazi project, though many historians still debate his true intentions. What is certain is that Hitler's understanding of atomic science was limited. He viewed nuclear research as one of many technological pursuits that could deliver a wonder weapon to reverse Germany's declining fortunes. The regime's vast war machine was already stretched thin, pouring resources into rockets, jets, and chemical weapons. As a result, the Uranium Club was underfunded compared to the Allied Manhattan Project. Yet despite these limitations, the program remained active, guarded, and dangerous. By 1942, Allied intelligence began to intercept reports that confirmed the existence of Germany's atomic research. References to uranium, reactors, and heavy water appeared in coded messages and captured documents. Scientists working with the Allies realized with horror that the Nazis were following the same path toward nuclear power that they themselves were pursuing. The difference lay not in knowledge, but in urgency. The Allies could not afford to wait and see who would succeed first. In London, the news ignited a wave of alarm. If Hitler's scientists obtained enough heavy water to build a functioning reactor, the next step could be the construction of a bomb. The Allies' only advantage was awareness. They knew where the key ingredient was being made. The Norsk Hydro plant at Vemork became, almost overnight, one of the most strategically important targets in Europe. The stakes could not have been higher. In the wrong hands, atomic energy could end the war in an instant, by annihilating entire cities. The Allied command understood that stopping the Nazi nuclear program was not merely a tactical objective, it was a moral imperative. And so, plans began to form for a mission unlike any other. A mission not to capture or conquer, but to destroy. What followed would test the limits of human endurance and courage. In the frozen wilderness of Norway, A small band of men would be asked to do what entire armies could not: strike at the heart of Hitler's atomic dream and erase it from existence. The world did not yet know it, but the race for the atom had entered its most dangerous phase. The science of destruction had been born, and now, the fate of that science rested in the hands of those who dared to defy it. Section 3. The element of victory. What is heavy water? Heavy water is a form of water that looks and behaves like ordinary water but has one crucial difference at the atomic level. Its hydrogen atoms contain an extra neutron, making them heavier. Chemically, it is still H2O, but the presence of deuterium, hydrogen's heavier sibling, changes how it interacts with neutrons released during nuclear fission. In a nuclear chain reaction, atoms split and release neutrons. Those neutrons must be slowed down or moderated, so that they are more likely to collide with other uranium nuclei and cause further fissions. Ordinary water and some solids can act as moderators, but many materials absorb too many neutrons or cannot survive the harsh conditions inside a reactor. Heavy water is nearly ideal because it slows neutrons without capturing them, allowing the chain reaction to proceed more effectively. For Germany's uranium club, heavy water was not an academic curiosity, it was a practical necessity. German experiments with graphite had failed because the available graphite contained impurities that absorbed neutrons. The scientists concluded that heavy water offered the best path forward. With a sufficient supply of heavy water, a reactor could be built to sustain a chain reaction. That reactor could serve as both a research tool and a stepping stone toward a weapon. The production of heavy water in large quantities is technically demanding. It requires industrial-scale electrolysis or distillation processes that separate deuterium from ordinary hydrogen. In the 1930s, such production was rare and costly. Most countries lacked the specialized facilities and power resources required to produce heavy water at scale. At that time, the world had a single industrial source capable of significant output: the Norsk Hydro plant at Vemork in Norway. Built to produce ammonia and fertilizers using hydroelectric power, the Vemork facility had the unique combination of electricity and chemical equipment needed to extract deuterium oxide as a byproduct. Before the war, the plant's heavy water output was modest and intended for laboratories and industrial uses. After the German occupation, production shifted toward the needs of the Reich. The geography of Vemork made it both a valuable asset and a seemingly impregnable target. The plant sat on the banks of the Rjukan Falls, surrounded by steep cliffs, deep gorges, and a freezing fjord. Access by land was difficult and slow. Access by air was dangerous given the weather and the difficulty of precision bombing. For the German occupiers, the facility could be defended with a modest garrison, barriers, and patrols, yet its isolation would also complicate resupply and repair. To Allied planners, the picture was stark: destroy Vemork's heavy water production or allow the Nazis to continue. The material could not be allowed to gather in German laboratories. The quantities needed for a full-scale reactor were not trivial. Barrels and barrels of heavy water would be required. Every shipment that reached the Reich was a step closer to unlocking an atomic chain reaction. Intelligence gathered from spies, intercepted communications, and resistance contacts confirmed that shipments were moving and that the Germans were treating the material with secrecy and urgency. The Allies knew that a direct, sustained bombardment might not suffice to halt production, and that bombing risked contaminating the surrounding town and infrastructure and might not eliminate stockpiles already shipped out. Thus heavy water became the axis on which strategies turned. It was a substance small enough to be moved in barrels, yet vital enough that its destruction might change the course of the war. It was also a substance that demanded a different kind of military solution: surgical, covert, and executed by those who knew the land and could operate in its brutal climate. The reality of heavy water transformed Vemork from an industrial plant into one of the most significant strategic targets of the war. Its value was not measured in tanks or planes, but in the atomic possibilities it represented. Destroying the plant would not only eliminate a critical material, it would also strike at the heart of a scientific program whose success could mean apocalypse. In the months that followed, the presence of heavy water at Vemork would draw spies, saboteurs, and commandos. It would become the focal point of a clandestine struggle that would test courage, ingenuity, and the limits of human endurance. The men who volunteered for that task did so knowing that what they carried out would be judged not by conventional military standards but by its potential to prevent a catastrophe beyond imagining. The stage was set, a small factory high in the Norwegian mountains, guarded by soldiers and machinery, held the key to whether nuclear fire would become Hitler's weapon. The battle for heavy water would be fought not with mass divisions but with stealth, silence, and explosives, operations designed to make a single, decisive difference in the global conflict. When German forces invaded Norway in April 1940, the occupation changed the country overnight. The Nazi flag flew above government buildings, German troops occupied towns and harbors, and strategic industries were taken under direct control. Among those industries was Norsk Hydro at Vemork, a remote but world-class facility that suddenly found itself at the center of a global struggle. What had once produced fertilizer now produced a material the Reich considered essential to future weapons research. Norwegian society did not accept occupation quietly. From the first days of the war, a network of resistance began to form. Students, teachers, factory workers, and soldiers who had escaped the collapse of Norway's defense joined in small, clandestine groups. These cells collected intelligence, distributed illegal newspapers, and sabotaged German operations. Over time, they organized into more formal structures that coordinated with the exiled Norwegian government in London and with British intelligence services. Among the most important links between London and Oslo was the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, the British agency tasked with supporting resistance movements and conducting sabotage behind enemy lines. The SOE recruited and trained Norwegian exiles and volunteers in covert warfare techniques, parachuting, demolition, mountain survival, and radio operation. Many of these men and women would return to Norway as the backbone of operations designed to disrupt German war-making capacity. A key figure in transforming scattered resistance into a focused campaign against the Nazi nuclear effort was Leif Tronsted. A respected Norwegian chemist and professor who had fled to Britain, Tronsted understood the science behind the uranium project better than most. From London he relayed critical information about heavy water and the importance of the Vemork plant. Tronsted argued that destroying the heavy water production at Vemork would deal a decisive blow to the German atomic program. His technical knowledge and strategic vision helped convince Allied planners that a sabotage mission was not only desirable but essential. The Norwegians who would carry out the task were not professional commandos from the regular army. They were men forged by occupation, skiers, hunters, fisheries workers, and engineers familiar with the terrain and trained to survive in extreme conditions. These volunteers joined the Norwegian Independent Company, commonly known as Kompaniling, a unit formed under SOE command. Kompaniling combined local knowledge with British training and equipment, creating a force uniquely suited for operations in Norway's mountains and fjords. Life under occupation made the choice to resist both urgent and perilous. Vemork's workforce included many local Norwegians who continued their jobs under German supervision. They lived in a precarious balance, providing the plant with skilled labor while watching the heavy water barrels roll through the facility under the eyes of German guards. Open dissent risked arrest, deportation, or execution. Yet in the shadows, workers passed information, accepted clandestine meetings, and in some cases aided the resistance with small acts of defiance that would later prove invaluable. Security at Vemork was methodical and strict. German engineers and military personnel monitored production and guarded shipments. Company managers, some coerced and some collaborating, operated under close supervision. Patrols and checkpoints controlled access to the plant. The geography of the site, a power station clinging to cliffs above a roaring river and a narrow valley accessible only by difficult mountain paths, made conventional assault unlikely. From the occupiers' perspective, the isolation was an advantage. From the resistance's perspective, the same isolation offered opportunities for stealth and surprise if they could reach the plant undetected. Communication between Norwegian resistance cells, the exiled government, and SOE in London was dangerous and slow. Radio operators risked detection by German radio direction teams. Couriers crossed frozen lakes and mountain passes under the threat of patrols and betrayal. Every meeting might be watched. Every plan might be compromised. Nevertheless, The conviction that Vemork must be stopped pushed men and women to take extraordinary risks. As plans for sabotage took shape, the resistance faced practical and moral dilemmas. Sabotaging a plant in a small town could lead to reprisals against civilians, and the risk of capture brought the threat of torture and execution. Yet the alternative, allowing the steady flow of heavy water to strengthen the Nazi nuclear project, was unconscionable. For the Norwegians who volunteered, the choice was clear: to fight in the only way available, in the terrain they knew best, and to attempt a mission that could alter the fate of the war. By late 1942 and into 1943, a small but determined force of trained Norwegian saboteurs, armed with explosives supplied by the British, prepared to infiltrate the mountains around Urjukan. Their orders were direct: find a way inside the plant, destroy the generators and heavy water cells, and escape. The men who accepted that order did so knowing they would face brutal cold, treacherous terrain, and a well-armed enemy. They also knew that success would demand precision, patience, and nerves of steel. The birth of the Norwegian resistance was not a single moment but a series of decisions, small acts that accumulated into organized rebellion. It was local knowledge married to international support, courage fused with practicality, and moral urgency that outweighed personal safety. In the shadow of occupation, ordinary Norwegians became the architects of an extraordinary campaign to deny the Nazi regime the means to pursue its most devastating ambitions. In November 1942, with intelligence pointing to continued heavy water production at Vemork, the Allies authorized a bold airborne strike. The plan, known as Operation Freshman, was simple in conception and fiendishly difficult in execution. British airborne engineers would be flown by bomber tugs towed gliders into the mountains, land near the plant, demolish the heavy water installations, and evacuate before German forces could react. The operation relied on precise navigation, perfect weather, and flawless coordination, conditions rarely found in midwinter over the Norwegian highlands. The mission began at night. Halifax bombers, selected for their ability to tow heavy gliders, left from bases in Scotland carrying specialized glider-borne Royal Engineers teams. Each glider contained men trained in demolition tasks, explosive charges, and the fragile hope that a desperate strike might cripple the Nazi nuclear effort. The aircraft crossed the North Sea into freezing conditions. Visibility was poor, winds were strong, and navigational beacons were limited. The mountains around Urjukan were shrouded in cloud, and the weather conspired against the raiders from the outset. As the force approached the Norwegian coast, one bomber and its glider disappeared in confusion. Others suffered navigation errors and mechanical problems. At least one glider released too early or too late, smashing into the rocks below. Survivors of crashed aircraft and gliders staggered into the alpine night, injured, disoriented, and cut off from support. Those who survived initial impacts faced impossible choices: attempt to reach the target on foot across treacherous terrain, seek shelter and wait for rescue that would never come, or surrender to German patrols. German forces moved quickly. Patrols found wreckage and survivors. Those taken alive were treated not as prisoners of war but as commandos operating behind enemy lines. Under Hitler's Commando Order, advanced in 1942, captured saboteurs and special operations personnel were to be executed immediately upon capture, without the protections normally afforded to prisoners of war. The men of Operation Freshman, many gravely wounded, were subjected to interrogation, then handed over to security services that carried out summary executions. News of the fate of the raiders sent shock through Allied and Norwegian circles. The operation had failed in its objective and paid a terrible human price. The loss of trained sappers and aircrew, and the brutal execution of captured men, weighed heavily on military planners. Freshman had shown that glider-borne assaults over the Norwegian mountains were vulnerable to weather, navigational error, and the harshness of the environment. More than that, it exposed the moral danger faced by operatives captured deep in enemy territory. Despite the failure, the lessons learned from Freshman were decisive. Planners recognized that British crews, unfamiliar with Norway's terrain and climate, would struggle to operate effectively in the high, isolated valleys around Vemork. The mission had also underscored the limits of relying solely on British airborne forces for a task that required intimate local knowledge. A new approach was necessary, one that would exploit the unique skills of Norwegians accustomed to winter mountains, local movement, and survival under harsh conditions. Military and intelligence leaders adjusted strategy. They increased cooperation with the Norwegian Independent Company and the Special Operations Executive, recruiting native volunteers who could parachute in, traverse the terrain on skis, and navigate by landmarks known only to locals. The emphasis shifted from large glider landings to small, highly trained teams capable of stealthy infiltration. Planners also revised equipment, communications, and extraction plans, understanding that any successful attempt would demand months of preparation and contingencies for weather and enemy activity. Operation Freshman, though tragic, became a catalyst for change. It hardened resolve in Allied command and clarified the risks involved in striking Vemork. The sacrifice of those who flew and fell in those frozen nights was not in vain. Their failure taught critical operational truths that would be applied in later attempts. The mission also galvanized the Norwegian resistance and strengthened the bond between exiled Norwegian leaders and British handlers. In the broader war, Freshman highlighted a grim reality. Special operations carried both strategic potential and severe moral hazard. Men who volunteered for sabotage missions knew that capture could mean death. Yet many accepted that risk because the alternative, allowing Nazi Germany to continue its nuclear experiments unchallenged, was far worse. The haunting memory of Freshman's doomed flights survived in planning rooms and among surviving family members, shaping the manner in which subsequent raids would be conceived and executed. The fall and sacrifice of Operation Freshman cleared a painful but necessary path toward a much different operation, one composed of Norwegians who knew the mountains as their home, trained by the British, and prepared to survive for weeks behind enemy lines. That operation, learning from the fatal errors of Freshman, would ultimately mount the decisive challenge to Vemork's heavy water production. But before those men could act, the ghost of Freshman lingered over the winter valleys, a reminder that boldness without local knowledge and preparation could lead to disaster, and that the cost of stopping Hitler's atomic dream might demand the highest price. In the wake of Operation Freshman's failure, Allied planners revised their approach. The new plan would rely on Norwegians who knew the mountains, the fjords, and the silence of winter nights. The operation that followed was smaller, sharper, and built on the hard lessons of the past. It would be called Operation Gunnerside. Selection for the mission focused on men from the Norwegian Independent Company, volunteers who had trained with the British Special Operations Executive. They were skiers, climbers, and resistance fighters, men accustomed to long nights in freezing wind, to navigation by stars and fjord landmarks, and to carrying heavy loads across treacherous terrain. Their leader was Joachim Ronneberg, a radio operator and veteran of clandestine operations, chosen for his steadiness under pressure and his knowledge of covert tactics. Training in Britain prepared the team for months in the field. They practiced demolition techniques, learned to move silently on skis, and rehearsed the complex timing needed to penetrate a heavily guarded industrial site. Explosives were tested and waterproofed. Every man memorized escape routes and rendezvous points. They were briefed on the strategic importance of their task: destroy the electrolysis cells producing heavy water and any stored barrels, then blend back into the Norwegian winter as if they were part of the landscape. The insertion into Norway required stealth. In February 1943, a group of men, including Ronneberg and Knut Haukelid, parachuted into the Hardangervidda Plateau under cover of night. The drop was risky, winds could scatter them, snowdrifts could swallow equipment, and radio silence was mandatory to avoid German radio direction. The team landed dispersed, separated by distance and weather. Their first challenge was to regroup without being seen. Survival became the immediate priority. The men moved silently across the plateau, using skis where possible and traveling by foot where the snow was too deep. Temperatures plunged well below freezing. Food was scarce. Their clothing, while adequate for normal use, tested the limits of endurance in endless white wastelands. They established a base in an isolated cabin, rotating watches and listening for patrols in the dark. News from local resistance contacts was sparse and dangerously limited. Weeks of hardship followed. The men trained in secret, prepared charges, and scouted routes to Vemork. They practiced entering and exiting the plant in simulation. Local fishermen and resistance members provided intelligence about guard routines, supply convoys, and the best approach route. Small acts of kindness from villagers, extra bread, a warmer blanket, sustained them. Yet every night brought the knowledge that a single misstep could end the operation and result in brutal reprisals. Timing became the deciding factor. The Gunnerside team waited for a moment when German alertness might be lower and when the night offered cover. On a cold February evening, under a new moon and a ceiling of stars, the men set out for the target. They left the remote cabin with explosives strapped to their backs, skis clenched in frozen hands, and a plan reliant on stealth, speed, and precision. Approaching Vemork meant navigating cliffs and crossing ice-bound rivers. The landscape itself was as much an enemy as the guards. Steep slopes that could send a man tumbling to his death, crevasses hidden by snow, and shifting ice that cracked underfoot. The team moved in small groups to avoid detection, each man watching the other's shadows for a hint of movement. They used the river and the cover of ravines to close the final distance unseen. Inside the plant's perimeter, the plan shifted to surgical destruction. The men split into teams tasked with specific objectives, one to secure entryways, another to place demolition charges on the heavy water cells, and a third to cut communications and delay alarms. Speed was essential. They moved with rehearsed efficiency, avoiding confrontation whenever possible and using hand signals to coordinate. The air inside the facility smelled of machines and heated metal, a harsh contrast to the clean, cold night outside. When the charges were set, moments stretched into eternities. Every second risked detection. But the operation depended on exact timing. Detonations had to destroy the heavy water cells without killing the workforce and without leaving evidence that could lead to immediate, massive reprisals. The men worked quietly, methodically, then retraced their steps into the darkness. As the charges detonated, the team began its escape across the plateau. They did not linger to witness the full aftermath. Their priority was survival, to regroup with the rest of the resistance, and to ensure that the sabotage achieved its strategic goal, to deny the Germans critical heavy water supplies. Exhausted and frostbitten, they skied away beneath the indifferent stars, carrying the knowledge that they had struck a blow with consequences far beyond the frozen valley. The success of Operation Gunnerside depended on local knowledge, meticulous planning, and the unwavering discipline of a few men willing to risk all. It marked a turning point, a small, covert action that achieved what larger forces had failed to accomplish. The raid did not end the German nuclear program, but it delayed it, and it demonstrated that a committed band of saboteurs could alter the course of a global conflict. After the raid, the men dispersed into safe houses and wilderness caches. Some returned to civilian life, others continued to fight in resistance operations. The story of their courage spread quietly through Norway and reached London, where planners and politicians took note. Operation Gunnerside had proven a model for future sabotage missions. Use local expertise, strike precisely, and withdraw before the enemy can mount an effective response. The destruction of the heavy water cells at Vemork did not end Germany's nuclear ambitions, but it delivered a serious setback. The Germans, alarmed by the audacity and effectiveness of Operation Gunnerside, moved quickly to assess the damage and replace the lost material. Engineers and scientists scrambled to repair equipment, restore production, and secure stockpiles from further sabotage. Every barrel of heavy water lost set back their experimental reactor timelines by months, a delay that Allied planners recognized as critical. The German response combined both technical and security measures. At the plant, guards were increased, patrol schedules tightened, and watchtowers reinforced. Shipments of heavy water were accelerated under armed escort, sometimes transported through treacherous fjords or by rail under secrecy. Scientists who had overseen production worked tirelessly to recoup losses, but their optimism was tempered by the realization that they were no longer operating in a secure environment. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence continued to monitor the situation. Reports confirmed that Vemork's production could never match pre-sabotage levels, and the loss of specialized equipment and material made large-scale experiments impossible for the time being. The heavy water already shipped to Germany was carefully tracked, but further sabotage operations remained a top priority. The Allies understood that even partial denial of this resource could prevent the development of a functional nuclear reactor. The Norwegians involved in the operation were lauded for their bravery, yet they could not linger. The Germans intensified searches for saboteurs, and reprisals against civilians were a constant threat. Some resistance members went into hiding, others joined further missions, and some continued gathering intelligence for the British SOE. The mountains and fjords that had aided their success also became a sanctuary, providing concealment for continued operations. In the months after Gunnerside, the Allies orchestrated additional efforts to ensure that heavy water supplies did not reach Germany. Norwegian resistance fighters and British forces coordinated to intercept transports and monitor industrial facilities. When shipments of barrels were sent by ferry across Lake Tyn, the resistance used explosive methods to sink them, preventing their arrival in German hands. These follow-up operations, though smaller in scale, complemented the initial sabotage and maintained pressure on the German nuclear program. The psychological impact on the German command was significant. The raids demonstrated that even in remote and heavily guarded regions, no facility was truly safe from determined saboteurs. Hitler himself reportedly expressed frustration at the repeated setbacks, while scientists grew increasingly aware that their work could be disrupted by small teams of highly trained resistance fighters. Morale among the engineers suffered, as months of meticulous research could be undone in a single night. Strategically, the operations achieved more than just material destruction. They bought valuable time for the Allies. With Germany's heavy water supply interrupted, Allied nuclear research at the Manhattan Project gained a temporal advantage, progressing without the risk of a parallel Nazi weapon. The raids ensured that when the atomic bomb was finally completed in 1945, the Reich remained unable to produce a comparable device. Operation Gunnerside and its follow-ups became a symbol of the intersection between courage, science, and strategy. A handful of men operating in extreme conditions could shape the trajectory of a global conflict. The sabotage highlighted the importance of local knowledge, timing, and meticulous preparation in clandestine warfare. It also underscored the role of ordinary Norwegians who, motivated by patriotism and moral conviction, challenged one of the most formidable military-industrial powers in history. In the broader narrative of World War II, Vemork became synonymous with the struggle to control atomic energy. The heavy water sabotage showed that decisive action could influence the outcome of war beyond conventional battlefields. It was a reminder that in total war, science and industry were just as critical as soldiers and tanks, and that the courage of a few could save millions from the potential horrors of nuclear weapons. The men of Gunnerside returned to secrecy, their mission celebrated quietly in London and Oslo. The operation's success resonated through the remainder of the war, a testament to the extraordinary lengths required to deny Hitler's atomic ambitions. By the end of 1943, the heavy water program was effectively crippled, and the vision of a Nazi superweapon had been deferred indefinitely, if not entirely extinguished. The success of the heavy water sabotage owed as much to the resilience and skill of the Norwegian resistance as it did to careful planning and Allied support. Behind the dramatic raids at Vemork was a network of ordinary citizens performing extraordinary feats, often at immense personal risk. Farmers, postal workers, teachers, and local officials provided intelligence, safe houses, and logistical support, operating under the constant threat of discovery by German forces. Resistance work was painstaking and dangerous. Couriers transported messages and maps across frozen landscapes, sometimes skiing for hours through blizzards to evade German patrols. Villagers hid parachuted supplies, food, and clothing for the saboteurs. Even small acts, like signaling guard routines from afar or quietly observing troop movements, contributed to the success of operations that shaped the course of the war. The resistance understood that every small gesture could ripple into decisive effects for missions like Gunnerside. The moral courage required was immense. Discovery often meant execution or deportation to concentration camps. Yet the Norwegians persisted, motivated by patriotism, outrage at occupation, and the desire to prevent Hitler from achieving unmatched destructive power. Their local knowledge, the hidden paths, ice crossings and mountain passes, was invaluable. Many of the operatives were also skilled hunters and skiers, accustomed to enduring harsh winters, giving them a decisive advantage over foreign troops unfamiliar with the terrain. Coordination with the British Special Operations Executive strengthened their capabilities. The SOE provided training in sabotage, explosives, radio communication, and clandestine operations. It also supplied critical equipment, from demolition charges to cold weather clothing. But the real edge came from the Norwegians' intimate understanding of the land. British officers knew that parachuting untrained soldiers into the mountains, as attempted in Operation Freshman, was disastrous. Success required native operatives, intimately familiar with the dangers of Norway's remote landscapes. The resistance's impact extended beyond direct sabotage. Intelligence gathered by these networks informed Allied strategic decisions, helping determine which German projects were most critical to disrupt. They identified troop movements, monitored industrial production, and reported on supply shipments, feeding valuable information into the larger war effort. In this sense, Vemork was just one node in a larger web of resistance operations that kept the Allies informed and the Nazis off balance. Personal sacrifice defined the movement. Families of operatives often faced harassment, arrest, or deportation. Villagers who sheltered saboteurs risked brutal reprisals, yet they provided what assistance they could. Each act of courage contributed to the eventual success of missions like Gunnerside and its follow-ups, proving that ordinary citizens could play a decisive role in the most high-stakes conflict in history. The Norwegian resistance also helped preserve the legacy of the operations. Their meticulous documentation, eyewitness accounts, and post-war testimonies ensured that the stories of sabotage, courage, and endurance would survive. While many of the participants remained anonymous during the war, their contributions were quietly recognized after liberation, shaping national memory and inspiring future generations. Ultimately, the Norwegian resistance demonstrated that strategic impact was not limited to armies or industrial might. Knowledge, courage, and determination, when combined with precise planning, could produce outsized effects. Their work at Vemork and across occupied Norway prevented the Nazis from exploiting critical resources, delayed the development of superweapons, and underscored the idea that even under occupation, ordinary people could influence the course of history. The heavy water sabotage, therefore, was as much a story of a nation's quiet defiance as it was of daring raids. Without the extensive support network, local intelligence, and unwavering courage of the Norwegian resistance, Operation Gunnerside might never have succeeded. Their heroism in the shadows became a cornerstone of Norway's wartime identity and a lasting testament to human bravery under unimaginable pressure. The destruction of heavy water supplies at Vemork had effects that rippled far beyond the frozen valleys of Norway. Though it might seem a single industrial facility could not influence a global conflict, the sabotage directly shaped the timeline of Germany's nuclear ambitions and, by extension, the broader strategic landscape of World War II. At the heart of the issue was heavy water itself, a rare form of water used as a neutron moderator in nuclear reactors. German scientists had hoped to use it to produce plutonium, a key ingredient for a nuclear weapon. Prior to the Allied sabotage, the Germans were conducting experimental reactor tests and stockpiling heavy water with the aim of creating a superweapon. By destroying the Vemork facility and subsequent shipments, the Allies delayed Germany's ability to build a functional reactor. These delays may have prevented the Reich from ever producing an atomic bomb, effectively removing a potential existential threat to the Allied nations. From a military strategic perspective, the sabotage operations achieved more than material denial. They forced Germany to divert resources, personnel, and security to protect and recover heavy water supplies. Engineers were reassigned, convoys were fortified, and production schedules were disrupted. Each step that German scientists and soldiers took to recover lost material or reinforce defenses slowed their broader war effort, subtly influencing Germany's allocation of manpower and focus. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. For the Allies, the successful raids boosted morale, proving that even the most heavily guarded and remote Nazi facilities could be penetrated with careful planning, courage, and local support. For the Germans, the repeated attacks undermined confidence in their ability to secure critical resources. Hitler and his scientific advisors realized that strategic materials, no matter how specialized, were vulnerable to sabotage. This awareness created fear, frustration, and distraction within the German high command. The raids also highlighted the importance of small unit operations in modern warfare. Conventional armies and air campaigns had limits. A handful of well-trained, motivated individuals could achieve strategic results far beyond their numbers. Vemork became a case study in the effectiveness of unconventional warfare, demonstrating that precise, targeted actions could influence the trajectory of entire technological programs and, by extension, the outcome of the war. Allied planners, aware of the potential consequences, continued to monitor German nuclear research closely. Intelligence gathered from Norway and other occupied territories fed into London and Washington, allowing the Manhattan Project to progress with a clearer understanding of the enemy's capabilities. In this sense, the sabotage operations did not just destroy material, they bought critical time. While Germany struggled to maintain a heavily compromised nuclear program, the United States and Britain advanced rapidly, ultimately achieving operational nuclear weapons first. The strategic impact extended even further into the post-war period. By ensuring that Nazi Germany never possessed an atomic bomb, the raids indirectly shaped the geopolitical balance in Europe. Millions of lives were spared, conventional warfare remained the primary means of conflict resolution, and the eventual end of the war was not hastened by the sudden appearance of a superweapon in Hitler's hands. Historians often argue that the combined effect of intelligence, sabotage, and technological monitoring at Vemork exemplifies how focused, precise actions in small theaters of war can have global consequences. Operation Gunnerside, and the Norwegian-led sabotage that followed, became legendary precisely because of this strategic significance. The raids demonstrated that courage, expertise, and local knowledge could alter the course of history. By denying the Nazis the means to build a nuclear weapon, a small group of men shaped the broader trajectory of World War II, ensuring that the ultimate power of atomic energy would not fall into the hands of the Third Reich. Ultimately, the heavy water sabotage underscored a critical lesson of total war. The control of science and industrial resources is as decisive as battles on the front lines. Strategic sabotage, when combined with intelligence, local resistance, and precise execution, could bend the outcome of global conflict in ways that armies and fleets alone might not achieve. Vemork, remote and snowbound, became a pivot point on which the fate of nations rested. Decades after the last Allied and Norwegian operatives returned from the mountains, Vemork stands not only as a monument to a critical industrial facility but as a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and the intersection of science and warfare. The story of the heavy water sabotage has transcended military history to become a narrative about human resilience, moral choice, and the power of small actions to influence monumental events. For Norway, the raids became a defining chapter of national identity. The resistance fighters who participated in the operations were celebrated as heroes, though many remained humble, insisting that their efforts were part of a collective struggle against occupation. Statues, museums, and documentaries commemorate their courage, ensuring that future generations understand the risks they faced, the winters they endured, and the lives they safeguarded by halting Nazi nuclear ambitions. The legacy of Operation Gunnerside also shaped the understanding of special operations worldwide. Military planners studied the mission as a model for combining local intelligence, unconventional tactics, and surgical precision. It demonstrated that success often depended not on overwhelming force but on preparation, adaptation to terrain, and exploiting the enemy's vulnerabilities. Special forces and commando units around the globe cite the Vemork raids as foundational examples of how small teams can achieve outsized strategic impact. From a scientific perspective, Vemork became a cautionary tale about the intersection of technology and ethics. The German nuclear program, though advanced, was vulnerable not only to resource shortages but also to moral misjudgment and operational errors. Allied efforts highlighted that technological progress in warfare is inseparable from human decisions, logistical challenges, and the societal structures surrounding scientific work. The psychological lessons of the sabotage are equally enduring. Operation Gunnerside and its follow-ups revealed the critical importance of morale, local collaboration, and secrecy. The fear it instilled in German planners showed that perception can be as decisive as material loss. It reminded military leaders that high-value targets are not invulnerable and that well-informed, highly motivated individuals could profoundly alter strategic outcomes. In a broader historical context, the Vemork sabotage reinforced the centrality of intelligence in modern conflict. The ability to gather information, interpret it accurately, and translate it into action proved essential for success. Allied planners combined aerial reconnaissance, human intelligence, and local networks to shape operations with surgical precision, illustrating that in total war, knowledge is as lethal as artillery or bombs. The story also holds ethical lessons. The mission was designed to minimize civilian casualties, focusing on material destruction and strategic disruption rather than indiscriminate violence. This deliberate restraint set a precedent for precision operations in later conflicts, showing that careful planning and moral consideration can coexist with military effectiveness. Finally, Vemork represents the enduring power of courage and collaboration. Ordinary citizens, local resistance fighters, and trained operatives from across nations worked together under extreme conditions, trusting one another to achieve an outcome far greater than any individual effort. Their success is a testament to what can be accomplished when intelligence, bravery, and ethical purpose converge. Today, Vemork stands as a reminder that history is shaped not only by armies and leaders but also by individuals willing to confront danger for a greater cause. The heavy water sabotage ensured that Hitler's atomic dream never materialized, altered the course of World War II, and left a legacy of heroism, strategy, and moral clarity that continues to inspire military historians, scholars, and everyday people alike. The raids at Vemork remain a powerful lesson. In the face of tyranny and technological ambition, knowledge, courage, and determination can change the fate of nations, proving that even the smallest acts, carried out with precision and conscience, can have monumental consequences.